So today I'm going to talk about the difference between killing POWs who are innocent, lying down unarmed, and perfidy. And the way we got here was that there was a video that surfaced online about what looks like Ukrainian soldiers. They had Russians who had surrendered, and then there's a brief pause, and then you see these dead Russians on the ground who we don't know exactly what happened. We talked about this yesterday in this episode, evil. This is evil, what happened. And now my greater point in this episode was to talk about how, like, the lack of respect for human life is just, it's just terrible. And here's what happens. But then I got a lot of people saying, hey, look, you can't say that. This is what really happened. I'm going to clarify what we know happened and what we don't know about what happened. Okay, so, and I'm going to talk about the difference between, and we're going to define these terms. Okay, there's practices relating to Rule 47, attacks against non-combatants. So that's the first perspective, and this is what Russia wants to present to the world as what happened. Okay, so that's the first perspective. Persons taking no active part in hostilities, including members of armed forces who have laid down their arms, and those placed hors de combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or any other cause, shall in circumstances be treated humanely without any adverse distinction founded on race, color, religion, faith, sex, birth, wit, or wealth, or any other similar criteria. To this end, the following acts are and shall remain prohibited at any time and any place whatsoever with respect to the above-mentioned persons: violence to life and person, in particular, murder of all kinds, mutilation, cruel treatment, and torture. So, if in that video, these people, so you see about 6 Russian soldiers lying on the ground, and a couple are coming out with their hands up. Now, then there's a pause, and then you just see dead bodies on the ground with blood pooled around them. So if that's what happened, that's a war crime. And that's what I talked about in that video. And you call that what it is if that's what happened. Now, we don't know that that's what happened, and that was my point, and I'll show you what I said in that in just a moment. Now, here's on the other hand, because I kept getting comments about people saying, wait, but this is perfidy. Okay, here is the definition of perfidy. Perfidy is prohibited by the law of war. This is also the International Committee for the Red Cross. Both of these are from the same source. Perfidy is defined in Article 37.1 of the 1997 Protocol as acts inviting the confidence of an adversary to lead him to believe what he is entitled to, or that he is obliged to accord protection under the law of war, with the intent to betray that confidence. So I'm surrendering, but I'm really going to, like in an action movie, pull out a gun and start shooting, right? If that's what you're doing, that's perfidy. Perfidious acts are prohibited on the basis that perfidy may damage mutual respect for the law of war, may lead to unnecessary escalation of the conflict, may result in injury or death of enemy forces legitimately attempting to surrender or discharging their humanitarian duties, or may impede restoration of peace. So, was that video this, or was it that? That's really the question. And the Russians are making a lot of propaganda value out of it was this. And I read yesterday what the spokesperson said, or the ministry statement was about it. And then I said, but they lie, so we can't really tell whether it was or not. If it was, it's shameful. And if it wasn't, and they lie about it, that's shameful. Okay, so let's continue. Now, the New York Times says the videos detailed below and those whose authenticity has been verified by the New York Times offer a rare look into one gruesome moment among many in the war, but do not show how or why Russian soldiers were killed. Ultimately, they leave a mystery that has been used by both sides in the online battle for hearts and minds. Moscow and Kyiv has each accused each other of committing war crimes in the same episode. The Russians accusing Ukrainian forces of mercilessly shooting unarmed Russian POWs, and Ukraine's Commissioner for Human Rights saying Russian soldiers had opened fire during the act of surrendering. Both are war crimes, right? We don't know which it is. Okay, that's really the problem here. Okay, the encounter was filmed by 2 sources: an unnamed Ukrainian soldier who was taking cell phone video diaries of the fight for Makieva, and drones videos most likely filmed by Ukrainian forces surveilling the offensive. The second video gives an aerial perspective of the same group of Ukrainian soldiers inside the courtyard in the farmhouse. Okay, so this is the grounds where this all took place. There are gaps in the video, so it's unclear why. The video cuts off, and when it restarts, six Russian soldiers are laying face down on the ground beside one another. At least two of them are alive and can be seen moving. The others are motionless. And you can just Google and you can find the video. As an 11th Russian soldier emerges from the outhouse, he opens fire, aiming at one of the Ukrainian soldiers. The Ukrainians are taken by surprise. The cell phone camera jolts away as the Ukrainian soldier filming the scene flinches, as a frame-by-frame analysis of what happens next shows the Ukrainian soldier standing beside him, raise his rifle, and aim toward the Russian gunman. Okay, and so that's what's going on. This is the scene. Okay, the Russian soldiers are lying motionless, apparently dead, most of them positioned as they were when they surrendered. Blood is pooling around them, and some appear to be bleeding from their upper body or head. Okay, and this is the aerial view. Now, there's a forensic expert. Okay, it looks like most of them were shot in the head. Dr. Roni Har, a forensic expert and faculty member at the University of California, Berkeley School of Public Health, said in the interview, there are pools of blood that indicates that they were just left there dead. There appears to have been no effort to pick them up or help them. The Rome Statute, this is part of the Rules of War international treaty that established the International Criminal Court, including Article 8b, which says killing or wounding a combatant who has laid down his arms, having no longer a means of defense, has surrendered at discretion, is a violation of the laws of international armed conflict. Okay, now the question is this: was it in one or two bursts of fire at the moment of or immediately after the Russian comes out and shoots the Ukrainians, Dr. Vucic said, or was it after the immediate threat had been neutralized as an act of revenge, and then that's a war crime? So, but we don't know, and that's precisely the issue here. And the Russians are just playing it as if it was the latter. We don't know. Okay. If the POWs were not searched yet, then Ukrainians don't know if they're armed, even if they're on the ground. It may very well have been that this guy has not fired, that they would have been captured as POWs and survived, Dr. Vucic added. Okay, so that's what we don't know. Now, here's how the Ukrainians are playing it, because what the Russians are showing is just nuts. And I already talked about what the Russians said yesterday, and you can go back and watch that video if you would like. Now, here's the Ukrainians, and I'm going to stop periodically and comment.
Such throw-ins of the Russian propaganda always work the same way. Different media come up with a resonant newsbreak. Russian state officials make loud statements. Audience does not analyze, but take them on face. In the video which Kremlin...
And that is part of the way that Russian propaganda tends to work, is that they just show this thing and say, this is what it is. Whether it is or whether it isn't, it's an open question. But here, they really have a piece that looks like one thing, and it could be that or it could be the other.
Propaganda cites as evidence a group of Russian occupation troops surrenders to the armed forces of Ukraine. However, the last of the detachment of Russians grabs a weapon and opens fire to kill during the surrender process. This fact...
Okay, now if you didn't know that, and you just see these guys surrendering on the ground, and then you see them in a, their heads are pooled with blood afterwards, it looks pretty much like the Russian case. But watch this.
Is completely ignored by the Russian media, although such an act is classified as military treachery, a war crime under the Geneva Convention. By his actions, Russian soldier...
See this guy? So if this guy comes out and he starts shooting, that gives the people that are already have their weapons trained on these soldiers coming out the right to just light it up. And they don't know where the shooting's coming from necessarily. I mean, they're reacting as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's what's going on here.
In fact, ceased to be a prisoner and deprived his colleagues of this status too. From the separate pieces of the video and on the incident, it can be concluded that by staging a surrender, the Russian servicemen committed a war crime, namely opened fire on the Ukrainian armed forces.
That's the perfidy that I talked about earlier.
In this case, persons from among Russian military personnel cannot be considered prisoners of war, but are those who are fighting and committing treason. Returning fire is not a war crime. On the contrary, those who want to use the protection of international law for murder must be punished. Dmytro Lubinets, Commissioner for Human Rights of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, on Facebook. The more war crimes the Russian army commits, the worse the state of affairs on the front line for Russia is. The louder its propaganda.
Okay, now from this point forward, they start to talk about other war crimes and propaganda and things along those lines. I don't want to muddy the waters. It is very true. And if you go back into other episodes that I've talked about, you see all kinds of discussion about war crimes and propaganda from the Russian side, but that's not the point of the story here. Right now, what we want to understand is just this particular point. Now, I talked about this yesterday, okay, and here I am in this video talking about this very same thing, and I want you to hear what I had to say, because I kept getting pushback like, hey, you're being you should be less even-handed. I am not engaging in moral equivalence. Okay, what I did say though was that if this was what this looks like, then you should call it that if that's what in fact it is. My whole point was about valuing life, but you can hear for yourself what I had to say.
So it shouldn't happen anywhere, but the lack of perspective about human life is what is really shocking here. The Russian Ministry of Defense talked about this. Now, this is the video. I saw the video on Telegram, and it shows these Russians surrendering here, and then what shows what seems like an aftermath of blood around their heads, like they had just been executed. Now, let's say that that's true. If it is true, it's wrong. Let's call a spade a spade. A barbarous kid.
I'm saying let's say that that's true, and if it is true, it's wrong, and we'll call it that. I'm not saying that this is, in fact, what was going on. It could have been the former, or it could have been the latter. But here's what my greater point was. The Russians are saying it's this, it's that, but we can't believe the Russians, because then they lie. Keep watching.
Killing of Russian prisoners of war, and by the way, I'm all in for Ukraine. I think that Russia has done very wrong by Ukraine.
They have.
But let's say that this is wrong if this is what happened. Okay, let's be honest about that. And I know you call them orcs, and I know that you hate that they're in the territory. I believe that they shouldn't be there either. I think it's wrong.
It
is.
But
if we're not on the good side, following the rules of war, then you're the same, and you don't want to be that. You don't want to descend into that. Okay, time out. We'll come back. A barbarous killing of Russian prisoners of war, the Russian Defense Ministry said. This is a widespread practice of the Ukrainian armed forces that is actively supported by the Kyiv regime and outright ignored by its Western backers, the ministry stressed. Now, here's the problem that I have with that. One, I don't see it as widespread because I haven't seen other documented cases of anything like that.
Okay, and I have been at this since almost the first couple weeks of the war. I started in like a week or two out documenting everything, and then I wrote a little book about Zelensky. That's really what got me going on this, was like, who is Zelensky? Who's this guy that said I need ammunition, right? And so I've been tracking week over week, and since day 85, I've been actually doing these videos, and it's now day 272. So I've been at this a long time, and I have not seen the Ukrainians act in this manner in general. So it's not something that it seems to be part of their DNA or character. So it makes me a little suspicious that was what it is. But
throughout the entire war, we're almost at 9 months. We're 3 days away from 9 months, and I see very, very little of this kind of thing. Two, this particular organization, the Russian Ministry of Defense, lies about things a lot. So it's hard to know when you can believe them or not. But if this is true, it should not happen. Let me continue. No one will.
And that's my point.
Be able to portray it as a, quote, tragic exception, except it kind of, where's the other evidence of this happening? That's the key. Amid Kyiv regime's alleged total compliance with the norms of regulating the rights of POWs, the statement noted. But again, when you lie, and then you lie, and then you lie, and then you lie, let's say this is true, I don't know if I can believe you. And that's really the problem with lying. But this shouldn't happen. Let's all agree that this shouldn't happen.
Okay, that's all that I was saying with that. But here's my overall point today. My point is, here's what shooting unarmed combatants is, and that's the definition. Here is what perfidy is, and that shouldn't happen. And that's where we are with this whole discussion. And what actually happened, we just don't know. Because we know what we saw here, but there's this piece missing that we can't really tell what's going on there. All right, I hope that helps you understand the difference between the two sides, and I hope that helps you get a greater context. Thank you for your time. I do these daily updates daily. Please subscribe if you're not familiar with me and if you care about Ukraine.